Many years of community input and participation went into creating neighborhood plans that produced future land use maps for the neighborhoods. In many neighborhoods, the CodeNEXT maps completely ignore neighborhood plans, and the neighborhood plan overlay is being removed from the draft. Mayor, you made the statement, quote, "For starters, let's agree we will not force density in the middle of neighborhoods. There's no sense in shoving density where it would ruin the character of our city, of the city we're trying to save in the first place, where it is not wanted by its neighbors and where we would never get enough of the additional housing supply we need anyway." The question is, how can this statement be reconciled with the current CodeNEXT map? And how can you defend the creation of an application of transect zoning in so many of our established neighborhoods?
I said what I meant, and I meant what I said. This whole process is ultimately going to be a balancing of competing community needs that we have in the city, which is why everybody in the city needs to be present and participating and at the table. My sense that I expressed probably a year ago, actually I expressed it during the campaign when I was running for mayor, David, you remember that, was exactly the message here. It's what we saw in Imagine Austin. The priority, I believe, should be on getting density along the main corridors that we have. It was inherent in the bond election that so many of you supported last November for transportation. It was built around those corridors. I continue to believe that as for all the proposals that I've seen thus far, there's not enough density to be picked up by indiscriminately going into the middle of neighborhoods. There's a transition that needs to take place between the corridors and the neighborhoods. I continue to believe that that's true. The neighborhood plans were taken into account, and to the degree that they were not taken into account, where there are differences between where the neighborhood plans were and where some properties may have been within that neighborhood plan, we need to sit down and look at those properties where there's a difference. And we need to put them up against the competing dials that we have as we turn them. Because I do believe that one of the things that makes this city great is our neighborhoods. It's how people feel about where they live. It's about the community. It is about this city too. Which is why I love it and why I stay. So neighborhood plans need to be given great weight. And to the degree that there's something that's a difference between a neighborhood plan and what is happening, we need to look at those and talk those issues through.
Thank you. And the next question is, in CodeNEXT transects, both neighborhood office and limited office are converted to higher traffic generating designations that allow various non-office uses, retail, and restaurants. At the same time, the on-site parking requirement for those uses is dramatically cut. For example, a 2,500 square foot medical office does not require parking. The question is, how does more commercial traffic and on-street parking make our neighborhoods safer and more walkable? And isn't our infrastructure system $2 billion short in funds for sidewalks?
We are woefully short in money to do the sidewalks in the city, as we were woefully short in building out transportation in the city, as we were woefully short about doing all the flooding projects that we should do in the city. And that exists. I will say that in the transportation bond that we just passed, there was $60 million put to sidewalks in this city, more than $60 million if you consider the work that's going to be done on the corridors, which includes sidewalks in areas where there are not sidewalks. I think we understand that that's a priority for the community, and we're trying to do everything that we can do in that regard. And you see us taking those words and putting them into action. The issue of when you have a use change, when you have, a neighborhood use in a building that looks like the houses in the neighborhood. So you're maybe at the perimeter in that transition zone between the corridor and the middle of the neighborhood, and you put that kind of use in, and you have a commercial use. We can build into this code limitations with respect to what kind of uses are allowed or not allowed. And we can make those related to how close or whether they're on corridors in the city. And in the meetings that we've had at the council, that's the nature of the conversation that we're having. Some people look at the codes that exist right now. Be careful, because I didn't know this myself. Because I'm learning about this code too. I'm involved in the same conversations that you are having about this code as we learn about it. But when you look at some of the code provisions, there'll be the -O at the end that indicates that there's the opportunity for these kinds of things. But there's also a limitation on the kinds of uses that can exist. What the consultants have said is that they have tried to track to a large degree the kinds of conditional overlays that have priorly existed within neighborhood plans when you actually look at how they would actually be built out. If that is not the case on any given piece of property where it's inappropriately allowed or used, then we need to fix it. That is the nature of the conversation that we should be having.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a little add-on to that question. The Envision Tomorrow tool that we're using to kind of project what might happen based on the zoning and the code. As I understand that tool is capable of producing information about infrastructure, potential impact and cost. Is that kind of information? Is the council going to ask for that kind of information from Envision Tomorrow to help inform our decision to see how that might affect the cost of new housing?
I hope so, and not only the cost of new housing, but the cost to the city, providing the infrastructure in the city. My hope is that we can run that scenario on different kinds of models so that we can see how they relate as we turn the knobs in the city.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Okay. Compatibility standards have improved the quality of life for many current Austin residents, yet transect zoning greatly reduces and in some cases eliminates those standards. Question, I'm going to run through 3 questions, but I'll go through one at a time with you. Why should someone living in their family home have to look at an 85-foot tall building at their fence line? Number 2, Number 2, why is the density of bars not restricted? Should bars be allowed on almost every non-residential property along Burnett Road and Loire? And number 3, why has Austin decided not to include the state law right to keep alcohol establishments a certain distance from schools? So we'll take the first one. Why should someone living in their family home have to look at an 85-foot tall building at their fence line?
So, we pulled in the consultants and we said, we're hearing at community meetings that the concept of compatibility has been written out of the code. That doesn't exist anymore. And we think that's a horrible and outrageous thing to do. And the consultant said, but we haven't done that. And we said, well, you're going to have to stand up in front of the TV cameras and speak to the community and explain to them why it is you think that you have built compatibility standards into the code. That is now on TV. You can pull up that video. It deals just with the issue of compatibility, and you can see how they interpret the code with respect to compatibility. To the degree that they have not done that successfully or in ways that we want them to do that, we need to fix it. And that's where we are in the process right now. Because compatibility is an element that needs to be part of our zoning. I will say that there was a conversation today that related to affordability in the city, that related to what tools exist for a city to be able to ensure that there's some housing within a city that can be purchased by somebody who's making 40% of the mean family income. Now, there are cities all over the country that have tools to be able to do that, to be able to ensure that that segment of their population is also able to afford to live in the city. Things like rent controls. We don't have the ability to even consider doing that in Austin, Texas.
Right.
Inclusionary zoning, where someone who's building has to build a certain measure of housing that would meet that market. We don't have that tool in Austin because we live in Texas. All we have to do in Texas is to start a conversation about a new tool that we haven't even done yet.
Tell the truth.
But we're going to pull everybody together and say, can everybody agree on this new, can we create a new tool? And the legislature in the last session preempts our ability to be able to do a new tool that only had a name. It didn't even have anything yet because we weren't able to flesh out what it was that it might be. So then, what tools do we have? And the tools that we primarily have in this city relate to the yield bonus or density bonus option. In other words, we can go to someone who's building and we can't say you have to put in a room or an apartment for a family that's making 30% impervious cover. We can't do that. 30% of mean family income, we can't do that. But we can say to that person, if we let you have an additional floor on your house, so you can make more money building an additional floor, we want part of the money that you're going to make on that additional floor.
We allow on almost every non-residential property along Bourbon Road in Milwaukee.
I can't imagine a street that has bars all along the way, other than 6th Street, 36th,
Well,
which I'm trying to change right now as part of everything that's happening down in that area, so that as a community we can reclaim that street as something that can be used all day long. But to the degree that we have a code that allows for a use result that we don't like, now is the time to change it.
Thank you. The final part of that question is, why has Austin decided not to include the state law right to keep alcohol establishments a certain distance from schools?
Is this referring to something that's happening in CodeNEXT?
yes.
Okay, so I can't speak to that issue. If we're doing something in CodeNEXT that violates state law, we need to fix it.
Well, as I understand, Mayor, it's not required, but it's an option the state allows a city to take, which would be to restrict the location, or to say that you could restrict the location of bars, a certain distance from schools. That's not required, as I understand, but the city's allowed to do that if they choose to do that.
So I can't speak to what those provisions are in this code because I don't know. But I do know that on the council over the last 2.5 years, we've had several cases that concern people that are asking for waivers of the distance from bars to schools. And in most instances, the council says no. And in fact, most of those requests don't get to the council because they know the council's going to say no. But there have been, I think, 1 or 2 cases where it was close to a school as a crow would fly. But as a practical matter, the ability to get from that bar to the school was significantly greater than the protected distance. And in those instances, and I think it's only been like 1 or 2, the city council has granted a waiver. Now, if that relates to this or not in the code, I don't know.
Thank you, Mayor. And the final question, before we take questions from the audience, imagine Austin calls for activity centers and corridors to be upzoned areas capable of handling growth and density. This was done to ensure adequate infrastructure and to protect neighborhoods from unbridled growth and rising valuations. But the question is, why does CodeNEXT ignore Imagine Austin activity centers?
It shouldn't. Clearly, it's something that needs to be fixed, and it is being fixed. So we have maps right now that only speak to the central core of the city. And I think that the council with unanimity has said to staff and to the consultants, you need to put into the code and be able to see physically on the maps when the version 2 comes out in August, the fact that we are in fact going to be dealing with corridors that are not in the downtown core area, as well as the activity centers and the nodes that were called out in Imagine Austin, so that it is part of this process. The conversation about that will be next Wednesday from 1 to 3. So that's part of the topic that we have told the consultants that we want and to our staff. And we have told them that we want to know generally how that's going to be done in the maps that come out in August. And we want to know, we want to hear that as part of the community. We and the community want to hear that commitment at our meeting next Wednesday. So on things like this is the kind of thing that you look at and you say, well, that's not right. So we need to fix it.
Thank you, Mayor.